person in this room today agrees on the fact that systemic inequality exists in status quo. And we believe that the best way in order to address this is by making receipts of welfare for families conditional on enrolling their children in primary school. Before moving on to my positive material, a few definitions for the house today. So first, we define receipts of welfare as government grants and different subsidies that are given by the state to families. And we define families as families with children. So we say that this does not include couples without children. So moving on to our policy today, right? Today's proposition will forward a three-pronged policy. Firstly, we see that welfare will be given per child as per status quo. So this means that at the point of a child's birth, the state will be giving the family welfare per child as what is usually done. And we see that this continues as per normal until the child reaches the age of primary school. So what this means is that if the family sends the child to primary school, the welfare that has already been given since birth will be continued. However, if this family decides not to send the child to primary school, the welfare that has been given by the state we will not allow the family to receive welfare that is sent by the state. And we see that in our policy, we'll also be absorbing tuition fees, and we'll also be continuing normal bursaries or grants that already exist in status quo, such as, for example, the MOE FAS in Singapore and other sorts of assistance schemes in other countries. So what's our stance today? On Site Prop, we believe that education is the best way in order to help one succeed, and believe that the burden on Site Prop is to show why our side has more benefits and why our policy is best for the house today. So moving on to case divide. Today's proposition will be forwarding three arguments. The first, about how education is the best way in order to get one out of poverty. Secondly, how we're best able to decrease social inequality. And thirdly, about how we're best able to decrease gender inequality. But before I move on, yes sir.
How does your side help the Shia Muslim minority in Saudi Arabia when you force these children either to die at home from starvation or for persecution in schools?
So we believe that these sorts of harms that are stated about the children dying or getting persecuted schools isn't mutually exclusive. You see that whether these children suffer, they're going to suffer on their side as well. And we see that what happens on our side is that these children get some sort of degree or some sort of educational qualifications that's able to help them in the long run. Now moving on to my substantive proper. My first substantive about how education is the best way in order to help one get out of poverty. So we talk to you about the nature of education, right? We see that and we talk about how education helps one to get out of poverty. How is this the case? We see that what happens is that when you enroll a child in primary school, this means that the child is more likely to get further education because of the fact that by the fact that the child is in primary school, we see that the child is able to recognize certain talents that they have or certain career paths that they take. For example, as a girl, if in status quo, maybe because of the fact that my parents aren't able to send me to education, I'm going to stay at home and cook and I don't know, do laundry and stuff. But what happens is that I go to school and I realize that I'm actually really good at writing, for example. And this means that I see that writing is a viable career path for me. We see that what happens down there is that when they have children who do not go to school, what happens is that these sorts of career paths and these sorts of potential that these children have are not going to be recognized, and this means that these children won't be able to fulfill the potential that they have. So we see that when they receive education, they receive some sort of qualifications that are better able to help them to get a job in the long run. And we say that this helps them to escape the current state of poverty that they're in. We bring to you the case of status quo, right? Because of status quo, we see that parents don't send their children to school, mainly because of the fact they don't believe that education is the best situation for them, right? Because what happens in most families is that because of the fact that money is a pressing need, because of the fact that the priorities of these people is in order to get money for them to survive, right? So what they do is that they send their children to work at a very young age rather than to go to school to earn money. So this means that for the rest of their life, this child lacks certain qualifications that are able to help them to access certain jobs, that help them to ultimately earn more money and get out of the poverty cycle, right? And we bring to you how our side is also helps to reduce child exploitation, right? Because especially in many backwater countries, especially third world countries, many times children work in unsafe or environments that are threatening to their health and safety. For example, in Cambodia, right, where children are as young as the age of 7 go through dangerous they have to scuba dive and get fish, and it's very threatening to their safety. But however, because it's the only means for them to, in order to their livelihood that they're able to they're exposed to, and we see that education is a much more viable option for them. And secondly, right, moving on to my second substantive now about how we're better able to decrease social inequality. So what happens is that in status quo, many forms of inequality exist because of the fact that many may lack certain education, and precisely because of the fact that they are in poverty, right? See that what we bring to, like, for example, stigma. Many people who are currently under the poverty line face a lot of stigma, and this means that there's a lot of predisposition to ghettoism or other sorts of criminal activity. Or for example, the stigma phase means that they are unlikely to get certain jobs, right? Because of the fact that potential employers like look down on them simply because of their background. And we see that because of the fact that these people afforded these opportunities not by choice but by virtue of their birth, we see that this is something that's inherently unfair, not something that we can stand for, right? Because of the fact that some people are given opportunities when they are rich and they're able to afford certain sorts of privileges, and because our side believes in equality and helping others and not letting them succumb to certain sorts of disadvantages from birth simply because of something that they were born into and not something by choice. We believe that what happens on our side with education for more people, we're better able to help them get rid of these systemic inequalities that they are born to. So because we are the side of the house that helps people to get out of poverty, because we're best able to decrease social inequality, I'm so proud to stand on proposition and let the motion stand. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and now I call upon the first speaker outside opposition.
When we restrict welfare, we restrict the needy. And that is why the policy on opposition today will be to offer unconditional welfare. We parallel this to welfare systems in Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway, where welfare systems have no strings attached, and as long as you are needy, you get the help you need. Our stance is that primary school education, sure, it may be good, but we recognize that for many, the poorest of the poor, it is not an option for them. These are the grounds that proposition must engage on. That policy was about absorbing tuition fees, etc. We will do so too. So the only difference between both sides now is the condition of enrolling in primary schools. Now, they gave a reply to a point of information, brushing it away, saying, oh, children will suffer on both sides from discrimination. No, the children on our side have the option of homeschooling or attending a school that is secular, which is not supported by the government or considered as a primary school. These children on our side would still be given the welfare. They would still be given the ability to put food on the table, but they don't have to sacrifice their education. They don't have to sacrifice their dignity and get bullied in schools. Nothing else, ma'am. Clearly, they concede that the children on their side is going to suffer when they attend schools that are discriminatory towards them. Something my second speaker will elaborate on in his substantive. No, thank you, ma'am. So that first substantive was about how education means you are able to get a job because you have qualification. But this is not true for many. It is disingenuous for proposition to assert that primary school education necessarily equates to job prospect. In fact, it is not true. Proposition fails to give any credit to the poor who have faced institutionalized discrimination, who have tried but yet are unable to break out of the poverty cycle. Now, then they mention about dangerous jobs. The parents on our side, we need to understand, will also not want their children to do such jobs. The only reason why they send their children for such jobs is because they are desperate. These parents are the poorest of the poor. They are the poorest of the poor, and they cannot afford not to send their children to do such jobs. These are the poorest of the poor that we are trying to forward to you today. No, thank you, ma'am. the proposition was only willing to engage on the idealistic poor. The poor that once you give them some aid, their children no longer need to work anymore. But if on our side we can give the aid too, then simply the children outside don't need to work and can go to school. The difference on both sides is about the poorest of the poor. The people who don't have the option to go to schools, their side is forcing such people to school. But before I move on, yes ma'am.
If these people are the poorest of the poor, isn't it more likely that they're going to send their children to primary schools to access whatever welfare the state has to offer?
Ma'am, we recognize that they're probably going to pick the option of sending their children to school so that they can get the welfare, but the welfare is obviously inadequate for them because the welfare we are also giving on our side. The difference is this: the welfare on our side, once their parents receive, they have the option of sending their children to school. If they can afford to do it, they will do it because they recognize education is what reduces inequality. But the difference on your side is that the parents don't have that option because the parents are now forced to send their children to school. They lose an income source, which I'll elaborate on why it's so significant. The second substantive was about a stigma of those poor students. Let's flip this. When you spend your time after school having to make ends meet for your family, you cannot perform well in school. The richer continue to look down on you because they see that poor students in schools cannot do well. So now to my case division. My first substantive will be on preying on the desperation of needy. Secondly, on the need for additional income source, my second speaker will argue that forcing the poor to conform to government-decided ideology. So now to my first substantive on preying on the desperation of the needy. Proposition case is attaching the condition of schooling to welfare. Regardless of the benefits, the fact remains that the needy are desperate. They need the money from the government to survive. If not, they wouldn't even turn to the government for conditional aid. The government on their side capitalizes on this neediness. They force them to comply with government restrictions. This is principally unjust. As a government, we should help as many of our citizens as best we possibly can, not to impose restrictions or to control them just because they are needy, just because they need something from the government. They must defend taking on an immoral stance of targeting those in society who need help, who turn to government for the help they need to support their families. Now to my second substantive, on the need for an additional income source. Parents are not selfish. They want an education for their children. They know that school is beneficial for their children and they want to give their children a better life. On our side, when we give unconditional aid, the parents that can afford to send will already send their children to school. But on their side, with conditional aids, the parent that still cannot afford to send their children to school will have. This is a necessary detriment. It is not about how in the future they may become highly skilled workers or whatever they may achieve. The harm is now because they force the poorest of the poor to choose between welfare or an additional source of income. One, they need to take care of siblings. Once you take them away, there is no one to take care of their siblings. Newborns and toddlers are left at home since most poor families are dual income. But two, they force the poorest of the poor to sacrifice either means, and as a result, they cannot afford to put food on the table, they cannot afford the roof over their heads, or even afford to keep warm. We are talking about malnutrition children and freezing families in winter. But sure, they want children to have an education. So tell a girl that she should finish her math homework when the sister has not had a meal for days. Tell a boy he should go to school now, leaving behind his siblings that are still freezing from the night before. The significance is the harm to the poorest of the poor. And we win on these grounds because these are the only actors who will consider not sending their children to school even with government aid. On our side, we understand the limitations of the poorest of the poor and we allow them to feed themselves. That is why we protect the most vulnerable of children and the poor. We are proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and now I call upon the second speaker on side contention.
came out to us today and accused us of restricting the needy. We see that it's actually on their side where they're actually really restricting the needy. Why? Because on their side, they do not allow people to get out of the poverty cycle they are in. Because there's no incentive for them to get an education, no incentive for them to actually go to school and actually get a degree in the future, and they're depriving all the chances for such poor people in order to get a better future when they actually have a higher chance of getting a job. Then they also made us seem so evil when it made us seem like we don't provide any welfare. My first speaker has already told you we will provide welfare even before the child goes to school. Just that when the child reaches an age where he is or she is eligible to go to primary school, we will only give them continue the welfare if this child is enrolled. That's why we see that the example where they brought about the bigger sister doing the math homework and the younger kid not having a whole meal for the whole day, we see that it doesn't stand because this younger kid will still receive welfare from the state. So, what are my several points of contention today? First of all, I'm going to rebut their point on how we're preying on the desperation of the needy. And second point of contention is the one where they brought up where there's a need for additional care in the household. On to my first point of contention about where they came up and told us that we're preying on the desperation of the needy. First of all, we see that when someone preys on the desperation of another person, this has an evil intention in the first place. We see that on our side, we don't actually have a wrong intention because we're not making use of their own desperation to our advantage. We're making sure that because of this desperation they have, they will be much more incentivized to send their kids into school. So in exchange for them to have their welfare continued. And then we think that it's much worse on their side, where they're making an option, lessening the likelihood of them sending their own children to school, depriving their own children of being able to get an education and get a degree and get a job in the first place. So we think that their side makes it far worse. The second point of contention about the additional help they need in the household. First of all, we think that the people in the poorer sectors, they tend to make this decision of keeping the kids at home to do work is because they only look at the short-term benefits of this. We think that it's only on our side where we focus on the long-term benefits, where we make sure people go to school, where we make sure that people they will have a much more sustainable future when they actually have a chance to get a job. Will it be much better than these kids having to stay at home and not having such a chance in the first place? And that's why we see that their point falls on that side. What I will be talking about today is how is about the reducing gender equality. Yes, sir.
On your side, if you only need to go to primary school for welfare, what is the incentive for children to stay on in education after primary school?
Whereas on your side, we see that when you don't actually incentivize people to go to primary school in the first place, that these people from the poor sectors have no way of knowing what education is really like. They won't actually have the motivation in order to continue. Whereas our side have that when we force them to go to school and let them see what having an education really is like. What is my substantive for today? First of all, we see that on our side, we will reduce gender equality. Why? Because even though that there is a rise in awareness that girls still need to go to school, we see that this actually hasn't permeated into society enough, especially in those poor families where they think that girls instead of going to school should stay at home and cook meals and sew clothes. And we see that because on their side it's much more unlikely for girls to be allowed to go to school. Because and that's why we see that it's actually on our side where parents, even if their kid is a girl, still has to send this kid to school in order to get welfare. And that's why we see that on our side, where we allow much more girls to go into school, that they get a taste of education, they probably can find out that actually I'm really good at math and I have a prospective career in becoming a mathematician. Whereas on their side, they're completely depriving girls of this opportunity. And we see this only on our side, where we encourage girls to go to school, that they will be able to have a much more sustainable future. Why? Because even if no matter how basic primary school education is, these girls will actually get an idea of that they actually have a potential in the education sector, and it's actually on our side where we give them the opportunity for them to realize their full potentials. And we see that it's on our side where we increase the likelihood of them having a job. Whereas on the other side, the girls will be stuck in a vicious cycle where all they are taught to do is just to cook and to sew clothes. We don't see why it's so right for their side to deprive the girls in
order to go to school and realize their true potential. And especially seeing these girls, right, what's actually happening is that because these girls they weren't born as girls in the first place. They didn't have the choice to be born as girls, and that's why we see that it's extremely unfair for them to be deprived of the rights to education when they didn't want this. So what have we shown you today? First of all, we think that we are the side that actually pushes forth and actually better combats poverty, where we allow kids to go into school and actually incentivize parents to allow kids to go to school. And it's actually on our side where we recognize that not only is is education beneficial for everyone, we think that everyone should have this benefit. And for all these reasons, we take this debate.
2 points of contention for the House today. First, on whether children can even survive in the short term of proposition, and second, on the long-term implications on children and society with proposition policy. So let's just move on to the first point, on whether children can even survive in the short term. And here's where we heard proposition's second speaker told us that parents are short-term, that they're stupid, that they don't know that education is good for the children, and therefore they don't care about these children. And here's where we gave you 2 responses. We told you in first how this is ridiculous. We already told you that parents want the best for their children. They're not selfish. They do know of the inherent benefits of education. They wished that they were educated themselves so that they wouldn't have to have their children suffer the same fate as them. Unfortunately, because of the poor state of these people in these disenfranchised communities in such oppressive countries, they are simply unable to survive if they don't have their children as a helper. Regardless of whether the children actually works as a source of income or the child takes care of their siblings or other children so that the parents can go to work and form a dual income family stream, these children are integral and necessary for the family to even survive in the first place. So when the family start dying of starvation, there's no long-term goal of education to even talk about when the children face such high mortality rates and they don't even move on to attain a job in society. But second, we told you that this disingenuous for proposition to assert that these parents are so short-minded. But second, we told you that even if these parents are short-term, sure, because if they are able to ensure the short-term survival of these people so that they have a fighting chance in the future, then we really win today's debate. So on to the second idea of the principal justification to conditional aid. So my first speaker already challenged this idea on how it is principally unjust to attach conditions attach conditions to this aid that's provided by proposition. But we've heard no response from proposition other than the fact that they have the good intentions. They said that we shouldn't care about the principal justification when the supposed outcomes on their side are good. But let's just push this further, because they might have good intentions, but really prove to you how the outcomes are actually bad rather than beneficial for these people. So we prove to you how these people cannot even survive in the short term in the first place, and how it's principally unjust for children to be forced to go into school. So now the second idea on the implications of proposition's policy on children and on society. So they brought us their latest substantive on how they advocate for gender equality and how girls now get to go to school. 2 responses, and how we win on bettering the life of these girls. We told you that regardless of whether these girls go to school or not, the parents' principles and values still remain the same. It means that society and the parents still view girls as lesser, as more unworthy, and it still remains because they are deeply rooted in culture and religion. As conceded by proposition, just because the girls do go to school doesn't mean that the parents don't change their perception of females being inferior in society. Therefore, the treatment of these girls, no thank you sir, still stays the same in the domestic environment, in the household. Just because they go to school doesn't mean the parents treat them any better, doesn't mean that the parents strap work after work on the girls after they come back from school. How does this manifest? It means that parents send their females to school for the least amount of time possible. Skip as many lessons as you can because you're not going to be productive in society even if you go to school. It means that teachers cannot help solve the intrinsic disadvantage of being poor of these females in society. Once they return home, parents take away all their schoolwork, they take away all their ability to continue pursuing their studies. The moment they finish school, they come back, they have to work on the farms or help their parents with the income and the labor. When they fail to achieve academically in school, that's when they become even more disincentivized on proposition. Because that's when parents use their failure in school as justification for female inferiority. So when proposition is forcing females into these schools to exhibit their inferiority to their parents, and that's when the societal discrimination becomes even more entrenched. And mind you, their failure at school and inferiority isn't by their own doing. It's the parents being unwilling to let their children put in the 100% in the schools when the females go there. And that's when they become even more disincentivized from pursuing education in the future. No thank you, madam. When they are unable to perform well. Because when their parents continue to pile work on them and the societal discrimination becomes even worse, they're going to hate school because school is the propagation of their discrimination in society. That's when they drop out after primary school on their side. That's when proposition are the ones that harm the females in society. So moving on to our last substantive on how we have the self-oppression of beliefs. So the problem with forcing children to attend schools is that children in oppressive countries like Saudi Arabia and China, for example, are forced to conform to state narratives and ideologies that are not representative of the parents or their children. Forcing the 48% of religious individuals in China, for example, to attend atheist government schools is disrespecting the beliefs of the people. This means that the children will be learning less of skills, no thank you madam, that actually have benefit to them in the status quo. It's more of government propaganda and rhetoric. That's why on proposition, they cannot claim that primary schools will necessarily equate job prospects and the skills that equip these people to go to jobs. Because when they are forced to go to schools, what do they learn in schools? They learn the Communist Manifesto in China, for example. They learn the Islamic interpretation of the Quran, not English, math, or any concrete, tangible skills that will allow them to uplift themselves from poverty in the future. But it's a double whammy. Because on top of that, they have to suppress their identities. When the Muslim Indian has to go to a Hindu school, when the Shia Muslim has to attend the Saudi Arabian Sunni Muslim school, they are one, either forced to conceal and suppress their identity, or two, risk ostracization, bullying, and even physical aggression by their schoolmates and even their teachers and the school staff. Proposition is forcing these people to either die at home or from starvation, or at school from persecution by the society, by their schoolmates, by the teachers who are from the majority group in these countries. Our solution is simple. When we don't force these needy families, these needy children, to join government-controlled schools, we prevent their beliefs and ideologies from being infringed on by the government. We don't force them to walk into a hell of oppression. And because on our side, where we better the job prospects as well as the future of these children, I'm so proud to oppose.
We don't force children to walk into a hell of oppression, right? The other side is the side that forces children to stay in that very hell of oppression that they already live in. And we'll prove to you why that our side is better at getting them out of this poverty cycle and this cycle of stigma and oppression in two main clashes in this debate. Firstly, on the idea of the well-being of children and their families, and second, on the idea of societal change. Now, firstly, let's just make a quick clarification, right? We know that a lot of people want the best for their kids. We think, and then they tell us that, yeah, the intention is there, but at the end of the day, parents are not going to send their children to school because of certain opportunity costs. We need to recognize that, as my second speaker has already told you, that is a lot, rather they want the best for their children, a lot of times they aren't able to weigh the consequences of this. Because at the point at which you're telling telling me that, a person thinks of the short-term consequences of something because they think that that's what's best for their child when it actually isn't, we don't think it's justified for you to allow a person to act on that very ideology. Then they told us that we haven't provided them a principled justification for providing conditional welfare. We think it's perfectly fine for us to provide conditions to encourage a beneficial act, right? We're not trying to further state propaganda and whatever. We aren't trying to prey on these individuals. We're trying to help them get out of a certain situation. We don't get how their framing of this issue as a bad thing even stands in this debate. But yeah, let's move on to the well-being of children. And then they made a quick clarification as well. They also made a slight contradiction, right? In that they told us that the parents want the best for their children. But then in second speaker told us that a lot of parents don't want to send their children to school. Anyway, so which side? What do they actually want to stick to, right? Because we've already characterized that a lot of children's parents don't want to send them to school. But then they come up and tell us that everyone wants the best for their children. They're being too idealistic. Their second speaker finally realized the reality of the situation. Next slide. Then they questioned us on Shia Muslim kids and how they're going to be oppressed in schools and stuff, right? And how this is going to be terrible for them. We think it's perfectly viable for us to create provisions for them and create educational institutions that cater to their needs specifically. So we don't have to send them to secular schools. It means that they're going to get persecuted. It's just like how we actually do segregate individuals when we think that there is some sort of harm to them. It's perfectly viable for us to do that. It's pretty easy to circumvent this issue. We don't think that harm actually materializes on our side of the house. Now, moving on to the well-being of children and their families. And here's where we're talking about the opportunity cost between work and school, right? Because on their side, they tell us that a lot of families want their children to act as an extra helper because they need the additional income. Here's where we put forward this characterization to you, right? A lot of families have to remain in this cycle of sending their children to work for them because welfare doesn't work for them, as their side told us anyway. So if the welfare doesn't actually work for them, as their side told us, how is that necessarily going to be mutually how is that necessarily going to be a mutually exclusive benefit on their side of the house anyway? If at the end of the day, even having welfare, they have to go and work to actually survive. We think that makes no sense at all. We think we'd much rather they use the time to go and use the time to go and achieve some sort of long-term goal that is going to help them in the future, right? But we also recognize that there are certain very unique benefits to having an education. Because at the point at which you never get an education, you're never going to realize that you could be a mathematician. You could have certain career paths that gets you into a vocational institution, many things, right? We think that career guidance doesn't materialize from thin air, right? You need to go to a school and you need to be educated to know what options there are for you in society. So the point at which people on their side of the house don't actually go to school in the first place, as they've already conceded, because they considered that a lot of parents don't send their children to school. We think that these kinds of benefits aren't going to materialize on their side. It's only our side that has it. Next idea, social change, right? Here's where they said that perception of females by society is going to worsen when they go to school because it's going to be the same because a lot of people have this mindset that females are inferior. We think it's more important that females themselves understand their potential because even in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, we think it's pretty clear. You need to have some sort of self-respect and understand your own self-worth in order for other people to actually understand your worth as well. So at the point at which even the females themselves are doing nothing to curb the kinds of oppression that they're facing, how do you expect any form of societal change on your side of the house? So on our side, it's where females actually get educated and realize that they have certain rights that they can actually actualize one day. And we're not saying that they're going to be in this situation forever, right? Because recognize that once they become adults and they have some sort of autonomy over themselves, they always have the option to actualize whatever right to freedom they have as individuals and as human beings. So we don't know how any harms actually arise from this. But before 5, are there any PYs? Okay, then they told us there's going to be a confirmation bias because these females are going to perform badly in school and then somehow society is going to think they're stupid. Anyway, okay, recognize that a lot of females actually do have the means to exit these kinds of societies that are so toxic to them in the first place. Consider also that the previous strand of analysis that I already used tackles this as well because at the point that we think that it's pretty simple that individuals themselves have to understand their own self-worth in order for any benefits to materialize from this. But then they said, and final substantive, which is very, very strange, right, on how schools have actually have a state narrative, and then people teach you like communist manifestos and stuff. So are you saying that nobody should go to school because, like, you know, you're just going to teach everybody the communist manifesto? Like, what in the world, right? So we think that it's pretty simple, pretty like intuitive to say that no matter what kind of state narrative they're actually like giving you on, like schools are actually like propagating, we think that there are certain unique benefits to education that will still exist no matter whether or not the school is like communist or or whatever it is, right? So we think that that substantive is pretty strange, honestly, and we think it doesn't actually stand. So because we've shown you how on our side, children will actually go to school and won't waste their time on something that isn't going to be sustainable in the long run, like menial jobs and like scuba diving to get fish every single day, we think that it's our side that helps them break out of the poverty cycle and make something of themselves in the future. Please let the motion stand.
2 points of contention for the House today. The first of which side better solves the poverty cycle, and second on the disastrous outcomes of propositions policy. So first, on the poverty cycle. Now this was all that proposition wanted to talk about. They talked about how education, primary school education, would somehow guarantee that you get employment and therefore you'll be able to lift your entire family out of the poverty cycle. We asked you first about any justification for how going to primary school equals getting a good job in the future. We got none. But even so, we think that they make the problem even worse. Because we think that they never told us what incentive people had to stay on in primary school. We PY'd them this in first speaker and we haven't gotten a concrete response until now. On proposition, you're only required to go to primary school to get welfare. And therefore, primary school is not seen as an opportunity, but rather as a requirement, as a chore, something that you need to do to get money. And therefore, you are likely to do the bare minimum and just get it over and done with. Give you lengthy analysis for this in second speaker on how people are likely not to value the opportunity of primary school. We got no response from the proposition. And therefore, we think that people are unlikely, that children, are unlikely to continue education after primary school on their side. At which point, you graduate with someone with only primary school education, even ignoring the other harms that their policy has. And we think that this means that they are hardly going to get employment, so don't tell me that they solve the poverty cycle, because they really don't. How does our side do it better? On our side, people go to primary school because they can. Because we give unconditional aid, it means that families now get more affluent and they no longer need children to be an additional source of income. They no longer need children to help with work. So clearly, on our side, children go to primary school because they can, because their families are affluent enough for them to do. And therefore, they are likely to see primary school as not a requirement, but rather as a privilege and as an opportunity, and therefore they are likely to treasure the value of education far more. We think this is powerful because it means that children are much more likely to carry on in education after primary school, which is the main objective of education in this debate. I mean, primary school, the main objective, is the main objective of primary school is to ensure that children stay on in other education. That is when they get employment. Our side is better to have better solves the poverty cycle. Yes, ma'am.
If I'm an individual from an uneducated family on your side of the house and I never get to primary school in the first place, how will I know what career options I even have and what I can pursue in the future?
Madam, we think that this has been a claim that has gone through the entire proposition bench, right? That people don't know what career paths, people don't know what education is. People really don't know what education is, right? It's something we heard from second. We think that this is the 21st century. It's absurd to claim that people don't know what education is. Even in the poorest districts, in the poorest countries, we think that educational programs are still going on. Even if they're not concretized in kind of primary schools, we think that these sort of educational programs still exist. We give you examples of how even the most rural villages in India still have homeschooling programs, still have education programs as villages, right? We think that at the very worst, we still have this education. In fact, as I'll show you later, we think that even if they don't go to primary school, even if they are really so desperate that they cannot afford to go to primary school, it's still going to be better. But at the very worst, we get children in primary school too. We ensure that they stay on. We are the ones who better solve the poverty cycle. So the last point on this first substantive was that it was bad for kids to do dangerous work. We completely agree. We think that this is quite irrelevant to the debate because we think that both sides agree that it's bad for kids to do dangerous stuff. We don't advocate for that. Like in status quo, it's not the children who do this. It's children do the kind of work like shopkeeping or babysitting. We think that this is far better. We don't really see how this plays out in the debate. So clearly our side is better on the poverty cycle, which is proposition's main line of attack. Second contention on the disastrous outcomes of proposition's policy. We told you in second substantive about an additional source of income. There are two responses. First of all, they told us that we need to go long term. My second speaker told you about how short-term survival is a priority, and if you don't survive, then you can't even get to the long term. We saw this drop in the proposition, so clearly they agree that short-term should be the priority. Their second response was that they use their policy so it doesn't matter, younger kids still get welfare. I mean, regardless of how exactly their complicated policy plays out, the fact is it's still either a loss in income or a loss in welfare. So it still represents a loss. They've still not taken out the two lines of logic that we gave you. First, children are needed for helping out with work. Second, children are needed for taking care of siblings in dual income households. Without this, families can't survive. The logic is very simple. If they go to school, they don't earn the money required to keep them alive. They are dead. They don't go break down the poverty cycle. The long-term benefits simply don't matter. This is the most concrete harm that we gave you on our side. So clearly, they've already lost the debate because they don't guarantee short-term survival. We then told you in second speaker about the self-oppression of belief, about how when people who are racial religious minorities go to school and they are forced to go to school and then they'll be discriminated. They case shifted the proposition and created a new policy mechanism suddenly that they'll create separate institutions for minorities, etc. First of all, I'm not really sure how highly conservative and religious governments like those in Saudi Arabia are going to agree to this. But second of all, this is a whole list of problems by itself. For example, these institutions become a target for discrimination and racism. We think that these institutions already have innate problems. So we think that if it worked, it would already have been tried. This simply doesn't work. Impact of this, it means that when they force people to go to school, it means that they are now going to be discriminated, and therefore we think that we cannot stand for this. Lastly, on gender equality, my second speaker told you about how they were restricted from studying, and therefore you feed the conservative mindset that girls are inferior. We think that the response to this was that girls need to know that they aren't inferior. We think this is still worse on their side, because when they do badly in school, they think it's their fault rather than the conservative society, and therefore they don't think that they have the ability. We think that the problem of gender equality is always worse on proposition when girls are forced to be discriminated against education. Our side is the one that really helps the poorest of the poor. Our side helps the vulnerable. So proud to oppose.